Okay, so what I've got here is I've got an A3 sheet of paper, and underneath it, and you can see this because I've got a light board turned on at the moment, I've got an A3 one-point perspective grid sheet. So what that means is I've got a bunch of lines here that are going from corner to corner to basically a center point about here. Okay, the center point is known as the vanishing point. So everything that I'm going to do from now on is going to be coming back to this vanishing point, and that's the important thing to know. So all I'm going to do in the first place, I'm going to go over some of these edges here, and I'm going to basically turn this into a room, and then I'm going to show you what that looks like. Okay, so I've drawn in some of my lines. If I turn off my light source now, you can see there's the center of my room, and these are basically, that's the floor, and this is the ceiling up here. So I'm going to use the grid underneath to be able to put items in there. But basically, I'm going to draw the item on the floor first, and then I'm going to come upwards. So I'm going to try and work out where it's going to go. So for instance, if I wanted to create something like a bed, and I wanted the bed to be this side of the room, somewhere over by here, basically what I need to do is I need to work out where it's going to go on the floor first. Now, I'm going to do this quite roughly and quite quickly, but this is my wall, so I'm going to make my bed come right the way up against my wall, and I'm just using the underneath grid now to help guide me. I'm going to work out roughly where my bed's going to come out. So bearing in mind that the closer it is to this side, the bigger it's going to be. The further it is away, the closer it is to this end wall, the smaller it's going to be. If I'd have wanted to make this room even smaller, I would have made this rectangle smaller. If I wanted to make my room look bigger, I'd have made the rectangle bigger, and so on, just to affect the perspective. So here's the base of my bed. I've drawn my lines using the grid. I know that it has height, so my height comes up against the wall. And I'm just, again, following roughly the grid. Now, at the moment, I'm not sure how high it's going to go. So I'm going to say maybe the base of the bed would come up to here, and maybe the mattress would come up to about here, and then I've got my headboard. Okay, my headboard might come up somewhere this kind of height here. Okay, so what do I do with that? Well, I know that if I've got height here, that height has to follow along. Okay, and where it comes up, it has to follow this line. It's a straight edge, so it comes up here and looks like that. If I've got height on one side, I must have height on the other side, but because it's in perspective, going off to this middle point, that perspective is going to make it smaller. Okay, so from here, my height's going to go across until it joins up with that line. Okay, and my baseline here, same thing, this has got to be straight until it joins up with that bottom area. So you can see already, this looks like it gets skinnier as it goes further away. Okay, I've got my mattress on top, so if I bring my mattress line over here, now in the first instance I'm just going to draw it as a kind of cratey shape, and I can always shape it a bit more afterwards once I've got the proportions correct. Doesn't matter if I go too long on these things. Okay, all I'm doing in the first instance is trying to get the proportions right. If I'm not sure, I just get my ruler and I follow the line. I could even put my little center point in here if I wanted to, and I make sure that my lines all go back to that vanishing point, that center point. Okay, here's my headboard. My headboard's got to have a bit of thickness to it, so I'm going to add a bit of thickness in here to show that there's thickness to it. And if it was going to be square, it would just look something like this. Possibly I might round the corners off just to make it look a little bit more interesting. That's going to look something like that. Okay, so it still doesn't look an awful lot like a bed at the moment. There's too many lines on there, but once we tidy a few things up, you're going to see what happens. So I'm going to pretend that I've got some drawers that go in the side over here. So I'm just going to roughly draw what I think they would look like. Now if I wanted them to go longer, all I do is just draw them longer. Still in pencil at the moment, all looks a bit rough until I decide to ink it in, which I'll do in a little while. And I would have some sort of handle on them that I would see looking straight. Okay, my mattress itself probably needs to be rounded off a little bit they don't tend to be as square as I've drawn them. So I'm just going to round some of these edges off, just to make that look a little bit more like a mattress. Now obviously if I wanted to draw pillows and sheets and things like that on there, I could. So what I might do is now just add a few extra bits on, and then I'm going to get my black marker pen here. This is a 0.8, and I'm going to fill in some of those lines to show you what it would look like and erase the lines I don't want. So I'm going to show you that in a moment once I've done it. Okay, so all I'm going to do now is erase some of those lines that I don't need any longer. Okay, so I'm left with basically the outline of my bed. So I could, I've taken these lines out here, basically because this is now a doona. It's going to be kind of shaded more. So to tell the difference, I'll do a different surface color here that I will here to kind of make it all stand out. But that's basically a bed drawn in 1-point perspective. Okay, something that's quite easy to do would be to add in something like a window or a photograph board or something like that was on the wall. Now the same thing, I'll turn my light source back on again so you can see on my grid lines. All I need to do is to make sure that if I do it on this wall or on this wall, it goes towards that center. So I'm going to do maybe a bigger one on this one and a smaller one on this one, just so you can see the difference. Bearing in mind, if I was doing anything at the end here, it would just be square. So for instance, if there was a door at the end of this particular room, now let's turn the light off and show you what I mean. If I wanted to put a door here, a door normally comes up to about 3/4 or so of the height of that room, maybe a bit more. So proportionally you have to work it out, but a door would look something like that in this distance. There's a gap here between the top of the door jamb and the ceiling, and you'd probably have some sort of frame that the door sat in. Now I could be using a ruler here. I'm just doing this very roughly and very freehand, just so you get the idea quickly of where it goes. And you're obviously going to have some sort of door handle wherever this thing opens. If I was going to draw a window, I'm going to put a window over here. So I'll follow my lines along and I decide how big my window is going to be. So if I had a window that was coming, it's fairly high up, probably proportionally it would look something like this. Now again, depending upon how you want to actually do that, whether you decide that there's a window sill on there that you're going to be able to see, okay, and that would look something like this as those lines follow along. You may decide that you're going to put blinds in there or curtains in there, in which case you might have something like a curtain rail that would go across the top here. And we're all still following the idea of this going towards this vanishing point. Your curtain could possibly hang somewhere from these kind of guidelines. They're going to hang downwards, and if it goes past the window, it's going to go a bit further this way. And it's going to have a bit of a kind of reeved effect on the top there, probably. If this side was pulled back a little bit, it's going to look something like that. But you're still following that same kind of line of proportions, and you could probably put some lines coming down here for where the curtain has got some folds in it, and you get the kind of idea. If you wanted to, you could always put something in here afterwards, like a photograph, to make it look like there's something outside. What I'm going to do over here, same thing, if I wanted to put a notice board or something in, but this time I'm going to put it much lower down. It's going to be smaller because it's going to look like it's much further towards the end of the room. So maybe it would be this kind of size, and again you might see a tiny bit of thickness to it. And if we wanted to colour that to make it look like a corkboard or something, we could do something like that with it. So I'm just going to ink those two in now as well to show you what that might look like. Okay, so that's what it might look like if it was inked in a little bit. Next thing I'm going to have a look at is how you deal with something like maybe putting a cupboard in, or maybe putting a table or something like that in. So the same rule apply, is you want to look at the floor area first and work out where it's going to go. So say for instance somewhere by here in front of this bed we want a kind of bit of a cabinet with a TV or something on it. So the first thing we're going to think about is where it's going to be positioned. So if I turn my light source back on again so you can see, I've got my grid work here to show me where things are going to go. I'm going to use that grid underlay to help me work out the floor surface area first. So how big is that area that's going to be taken up with a cupboard? So here's my bed. I need to make sure it's kind of in between my bed because we'd be looking at it sort of straight on. So I'm going to come maybe about here to start with, and I'm going to say it's going to go about that long. Now the same thing, I take my vanishing point line back again to try and get the proportions right. So it's going to take up that kind of surface area on the floor. Again, I'm going to have it pretty much up against the wall, so I'm going to now draw this. I need to work out the height, so it's probably going to be a little bit higher than the bed, so maybe something like this kind of height. Take the line up straight again here, so if we're looking at it, we're looking at the end of the thing, we're always going to see it kind of flat on. So that's really just rectangular. And again, if I'm not quite sure, I can use my ruler and take my lines kind of back again, so I know that my lines are going to go towards that vanishing point from these corners. Doesn't matter if I draw them too long to start with. There's that one there, going to draw that one in as well. That's the kind of proportions. So I'm going to come up from this corner here, and I'm going to go across straight from this area here. And that gives me my kind of proportions to start with. So if I had a TV that was going to be on there, the same thing would apply. Where's the TV going to go? Well, it's going to sit somewhere on a little base, kind of by here probably. And then that base is going to have the TV screen coming up from it. So it's going to come a little bit higher than that now, on the same angle again, going back to my vanishing point, and I'll draw what's going to be the bottom of my TV screen. Okay, hoping the proportions I'm drawing are kind of roughly right here for TV, and I'm going to come to about this far on this one. Just beginning to take shape a little bit, so it's not quite against the wall, but it's a little bit further back. It's got to have some thickness to it because it's TV. So I'm going to draw that thickness in, and again this is going to be square here as we look at it, but because it's got a thickness to it, it's got to have that line on the top as well. Okay, we might have the actual screen is inside the kind of plastic border that you see on these TVs, so we'll give it that little inner bit. Now what you can always do later on is you can stick a nice little picture using Photoshop, once you scan this, straight inside to make it look like there's something actually playing on the TV. So probably coming down from here now, I would have that part of the base. Maybe that will come out a bit bigger to kind of give it that feeling of solidness at the bottom. Okay, so what about the cupboard itself? Well, it's highly unlikely they're going to have any kind of drawers on the side, but you could have cupboard doors or something on the inside here. So I will draw a couple of cupboard doors in here. Maybe you'd have a shelf to put your Foxtel on or something like that. Telstra TV. Let's just keep it simple for now. We'll just make it into two cupboard doors. So we'll have a handle here and a handle here. So I'm going to do the same thing now. I'm going to ink this in a little bit so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so that's what it would look like, or something like that, if we inked it in a little bit. A few other things we might look at. So if you wanted to put something like putting a carpet or a rug down, that's really easy. But say we had a rug down in this kind of area, same thing. If we look at the lines, we can see where the lines go and the kind of proportions it's going to be. So if we had a rug that was going to be down here, okay, the last thing, not that we would have one by here, but if we were going to have some sort of like table or a chair or something like that in the middle of the room by here, the principle is exactly the same. You work out the kind of area that that thing would take up. So if I had a table that was going to be basically taking up this much space on the floor, maybe make this one a little bit longer. So I'm just following my lines underneath now. So you can see straight away it's slightly off to the right of the center of the room, but we still follow these same lines with it. So I'm going to have 4 corners. So coming up from each corner, I'm going to basically work out where the leg would go. So the leg is going to look this kind of shape. At this end, the leg's going to look much bigger because we're closer to the front. So they're obviously going to be the same. So I need to draw those at the same sort of distance. I'm still just guessing with sizes here. If you wanted to, you could measure them to make sure that they were completely accurate. But for the sake of doing this, I'm just going to do it kind of roughly. I'm still following my lines back. So that's where the bottoms of my my table legs would go. I'll make those the same size as well, making sure they kind of roughly go back to those positions. Now from there, in exactly the same way as we did the side of the cupboard and the side of the bed, the lines have got to come upwards. So they've got to be straight lines. Okay, so I've added a little bit of a bookshelf in over here and added some inking in, and I decided to make the legs here a little bit thinner at the bottoms than at the top, so they're tapered legs, make it look a bit more interesting. But that's basically what one-point perspective is. So long as you bear in mind all the time that you're following your line back to your vanishing point, back to that center point of the room, all your lines go back that way. Anything that you look at sideways on, you see the side of it, like here and here and here and here. Everything else follows towards that one-point perspective line. Okay, afterwards I'll show you what this looks like with some color added to it once I've scanned it. Okay, good luck.